Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama, yeah. And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions. We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, 9:30 on Wednesday, the 28th of February. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. You have made your point. That's a message from the Home Secretary to pro-Palestine protesters as he urges them to stop their demonstrations.
And talking of security, more support for MPs. The government's committed an extra £31 million to provide politicians with extra security measures, especially in their constituencies.
And the Holiday Inn plot. In the heat of the Tory Islamist row, Lee Anderson had a secret meeting with Reform UK leader Richard Tice. Is he about to jump ship? We're going to have Richard in the studio, but Catherine Forster has more.
Yes, he came from Labour. The Conservative Party offered him a home. But could Lee Anderson now go over to the Reform Party? I'll bring you the details of that meeting shortly.
No thanks, Emmanuel Macron. Britain has rejected a daft French plan to send NATO troops into war in Ukraine.
And the royal protection verdict. The Duke of Sussex will learn whether he's won a High Court challenge over a decision to change the level of his personal security during our show this morning. We'll bring you that when we have it.
And there's a huge farmers' demonstration in Cardiff, tractors descending on the Welsh Parliament building. Remember, Wales has been run by Labour for 20 years and they are very, very unhappy with the Welsh Labour government. We'll be at that protest.
gbnews@gbnews.com is the email address, as always. First, though, the very latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Bev. Good morning. It's 9:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Duke of Sussex will shortly learn whether he's won a High Court challenge over a decision to change the level of his personal security. He launched legal action against the Home Office over the decision that he should receive a different degree of protection when he visits the UK. The court heard that Harry believes his children cannot feel safe at home in the UK and it's not possible to keep them safe. But the government has dismissed his claim, saying the Duke is still entitled to protection on a case-by-case basis. MPs are facing threats to their safety and will get extra security as part of a new £31 million government package. It follows growing concerns over MPs being targeted by protesters in recent months since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office said the package would be used to increase private sector security provisions, with all elected representatives to have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with on security matters. Thousands of farmers in Wales will be demonstrating outside the Senedd later in a protest over a number of issues they say are threatening the industry. Farmers are unhappy with proposals by changed farm subsidies, which would include a requirement for 10% of agricultural land to be used for trees. They would also be required to earmark another 10% for wildlife habitat. But the Labour government in the Senedd insists the change is necessary to fight climate change, but could be adjusted by the end of the consultation. And any saving from the cut to national insurance will be wiped out by Tory council tax rises. That's according to the Labour Party. It comes after the Chancellor promised the largest ever tax cut for workers with a 2% cut to national insurance. But with 95% of councils expected to put up council tax to the maximum 4.99% from April, it's set to cancel out any savings. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning, 9:34. Welcome to Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, the Home Secretary made an interesting intervention. He says he's fed up, who isn't, with these marches in London, particularly in London every weekend, pro-Palestine marches. He said they've made their point, and this follows the report which suggested it's cost about 25 million so far, and he says, you've made your point, now pack it up.
Which is an extraordinary thing to say. You've made your point. The thing is, these people would tell you that the people in Gaza who are still being relentlessly bombed, they continue to need this point being made for them. Regardless of where you sit on the side of this debate, whether this action now by Israel has gone over the top and is just looking deliberately punitive, we still need to have the right to protest in this country.
Yeah,
we just do.
I sort of get the principle, but if you live in Central, it's a nightmare. It's expensive. It's not making any difference whatsoever. Like Netanyahu gives a flying fig about anything the British Parliament does, let alone a load of protesters. But also, all those police officers, there are hundreds and hundreds. And yet, when I saw the Ukrainian march on Friday, I hardly saw a police officer. Hardly saw a police officer. But the Palestine marches, hundreds, because the police are frightened of this lot. They're frightened of them.
If they need to be there to arrest people...
But they don't.
Arrest people,
But they don't appear to arrest many people, and when we get the anti-Semitic chant, they don't appear to arrest them.
They don't appear to. I agree with you. This march, though, every weekend, this is going to go on and on and on until that conflict in the Middle East is resolved.
Well, it will even more so now, because now the Home Secretary says, please don't. They will.
But you've made your point. Move on. Then they're not protesting about animal cruelty and beauty products. They're protesting about 30,000 children being orphaned in Palestine, in Gaza. So let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Well, last weekend, you know this story, it's been running for a week now. GB News' Lee Anderson sparked a row about Islamism within the Conservative Party. The fallout is continuing. Let's take a listen just to remind ourselves of what he actually said on GB News.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Caen, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Storm as well.
So Lee refused to apologise for his comments, and this is what London Mayor Sadiq Khan said last night.
Responsible politicians also know that racism and prejudice, no matter what form it takes, regardless of whether it's anti-Semitism or, yes, Islamophobia, should be countered and condemned, not given a free pass or left unchallenged for electoral gain.
That was Sadiq Khan at an awards ceremony last night. But in a new development, it turns out that the Tory MP, Lee Anderson, held private talks with the leader of the Reform Party, Richard Tice, over the weekend. So are we going to see a defection here? We're going to talk to Richard, stage left, in just a moment. But first of all, let's go to Catherine Forster in Westminster. Catherine, what has the reaction been from Labour in general about all of this, not just Sadiq Khan?
Well, to be honest, the Labour Party are really quite happy to see what's going on because it's quite extraordinary. This time last week, we were talking about the vote that there was going to be in the House of Commons, how it was going to prove very difficult for Sir Keir Starmer, how divisions in the Labour Party were going to be out in the open, possible resignations, etc. And because of the decision that the Speaker of the House of Commons made, that vote didn't happen. And then because of everything that followed from the chaos in the Commons and threats to MPs' security, that led to pieces from Suella Braverman, that led to Lee Anderson's comments about the Mayor of London basically being in the pocket of Islamists, and this extraordinary row now within the Conservative Party and the booting out of Lee Anderson, a man who until just a few weeks ago was deputy chair of that party, a man who was highly valued by Number 10 in that he was able to say the things that Rishi Sunak couldn't, but that a lot of people felt. So now I was at the Reform Party conference. I was talking to Richard Tice on Saturday when Lee Anderson had the Conservative whip taken away from him. And we now learn that the very next day, Richard Tice met Lee Anderson on his way back from the Reform conference in Doncaster, in a Holiday Inn close to Lee Anderson's constituency. Now, we don't know what will happen, but obviously if Lee Anderson went to Reform, that would be a big win for them. They're about 13% in the polls, and also that would send a worrying message to a lot of voters about the Conservatives and the Red Wall.
All right, thank you very much, Catherine Forster here. Well, the man himself is here. What's happening?
Very good morning to you. Well,
now, don't give us any of your political flannel here. You're with friends here, Richard Tice. I want to know the truth.
Absolutely, but everybody wants to know, and I will say what I've always said. I'm not giving a running commentary of who I speak to from whichever party, whether I've spoken to them, whether I've met them or whatever.
We're not bothered about anyone else. We just want to know about Lee Anderson.
Absolutely, but, I have to treat everybody fairly. I'm not giving a running commentary. What I am saying is that the Tory party have got themselves in a complete and utter pickle over this issue. And you just had the clip there of Sadiq Khan. Let's be very clear what's going on here. He is a man who is seeking to divide and smear and label, and ultimately he's looking to suppress debate and discussion. Look, Lee's admitted what he said was clumsy. I put out a statement on Monday. Yes, clumsy is right, but actually he speaks the sentiment of what he was trying to say is actually supported by millions and millions of British citizens who are furious about what's going on our streets.
Was he Islamophobic? This debate is all about language, Richard.
It is, and the answer to that is quite clearly no. In fact, it's nowhere near. Now, we don't have a legal statutory definition of Islamophobic, but the best one is by the people who first invented the word. It's the Runnymede Trust. And I'll read you what their definition is that they recommend to the United Nations and the British government. A fear, prejudice and hatred of Muslims that leads to provocation, hostility and intolerance by means of threatening harassment, abuse, incitement and intimidation of Muslims both in the online and offline world. I mean, that is their definition, right? That is nowhere near where what Lee was. No. And frankly, that proves that Sadiq Khan actually is using this to try and suppress debate, because whenever he disagrees with someone or someone disagrees with him, he labels them. He labelled me a far-right racist because I was anti-lockdown. That's what he does, and it's appalling, and it's got to be called out. So what Lee said was nowhere near the best definition of Islamophobia.
Well, and the Tories haven't signed up to the definition of it anyway.
Which is their own stupidity, frankly.
Yeah. But talking of language and clumsy, your deputy, Ben Habib, clearly isn't keen on this man, Lee Anderson, joining the Tory party. Quoting a newspaper...
You mean joining Reform?
Joining Reform, sorry, forgive me. I'd be circumspect about anyone who can't express themselves accurately, clearly, and in matters of great sensitivity. Lee clearly hasn't got a grasp, in my view, of the language required to identify and address the problem.
Yeah, look, by everybody's recognition...
He doesn't want them in.
No, that's actually not the point. The point is, by everybody's recognition, Lee speaks from the heart. And actually, millions of British citizens appreciate that. He just tells it as he sees it. And occasionally you're live on TV, you slightly get the words in the wrong order. What's much more important than hurty-worty words, frankly, is what's going on the streets.
Yeah.
And whether it's the streets of London or the streets of Rochdale, we are being terrified. I've got candidates being issued with death threats.
Yeah.
Right? I've had to move my staff out of accommodation. We've got the Jewish community in London terrified.
Yeah.
The police in Parliament Square terrified. Now, this is a terrible situation, and it was literally here, exactly 20 weeks ago, October the 11th, I said the right to protest does not give you the right to break the law. I was right then. Sadly, these marches have been allowed to go ahead. They've broken the law in multiple cases, and they have created a sense of terror and fear.
Well, I agree with a lot of that. So do you agree with Cleverly they should stop now?
Cleverly's expressed it completely wrongly.
Yeah.
Right? What he should be saying is these marches are inciting hatred and anti-Semitism, and that's why they've got to stop.
Yeah.
Of course, Bev, the right to protest is sacrosanct, but it doesn't give you the right to break the law.
But
I knew it the very first week because
But individuals break the law. A protest cannot break the law. Thankfully, in this country, a protest cannot break the law.
Have you been to any of these marches?
I have driven past the Palestinian
Have you actually been into them and talked to them?
No, I haven't.
Right,
but you know what I was surprised by? I will say I was surprised by how many National Trust card holding do-gooders in their knitted jumpers were there. How many white middle-class people with a little thermos flask of coffee were also in those marches?
I've been into two of them, and on both occasions they were vile, ranting, abusive. I just asked them, I said, do you want to release the hostages? Do you condemn October the 7th? And do you condemn Hamas? And they weren't prepared to do it on October the 9th. Before Israel had even responded, they were at this. These people, they want to terrorise us, they want to bully us, and it's unacceptable.
And they also want an instant ceasefire with Hamas... still has huge parts of control.
A one-sided ceasefire is called surrender.
Yeah.
So look, I've been right. I've been proven 110% right on this. The government has been utterly weak. Cleverly's now being clueless with his words, and therefore you're right. But it's not about the right to protest. It's about the right to bully, intimidate, and break the law.
Then those people should be arrested.
Yeah, but we've got to push you, I'm afraid, on this individual who said you can't do a running commentary. Is Lee Anderson going to join Reform UK?
No, I'm not giving a running commentary on those discussions.
Andrew, you want him to?
Let's brainstorm the pros and cons. What would the pros be of Lee Anderson joining Reform, do you think, for you?
Lee Anderson speaks for millions of people up and down the country who are furious with what's going on and how our security and the whole atmosphere of the country is changing. And that's, in that sense, you know, frankly, the Tory party, I think they've got it completely wrong.
But isn't
abandoning him.
Right? He's a potential liability. Because that's what he's saying.
What might the negatives be?
What might the negatives be? Frankly, who knows? But I'm not giving a running commentary.
Well, we can discuss what the negatives might be. The negatives might be that some people have taken a headline about Lee Anderson. You can discuss that.
I'm not discussing that.
Some people have taken a headline about Lee Anderson and they'll say, oh, he's the Islamophobic guy. Oh, now he's joined Reform. If they're just splashing around in the shallows of this story, that could reflect badly on Reform.
Which is why the definition that I've read out is the important thing to focus on. And the Tory party and the Labour Party, they won't do that because they're using it to their own political ends. I'm talking about the right definition, the Runnymede Trust definition. Yeah. That's what people should use. Stop. And actually, what Sadiq Khan's doing, he's the one creating division and anxiety. It's not Lee Anderson, let me tell you.
Let me ask you another question. How does it work in the constitution of the Reform UK? If he does want to join your party, is it in your gift? You're the leader? Or do you have a committee it has to go through? How do these things work?
We're a great team, and we discuss all these things, and we come to a conclusion, as you would expect by a well-run entity.
So it's not a decision for you?
Look, we're a great team. We'll discuss it.
For you.
And ultimately, someone has to make the decision, of course.
So and that would be you.
Ultimately, that's the boss.
What would the negatives be for the Conservative Party if Lee Anderson comes and joins Reform?
Look, they've already had the negatives. Their negatives is they're in absolute chaos. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the definition of Islamophobia. They're all petrified. and they just look ridiculous, frankly.
No, come on, let's use our imagination. If he leaves, if there's former Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party, joins Reform UK in the next few days, what does that tell the British public about the Conservative Party?
That they're clueless and out of touch with the British people who want these marches of anti-Semitic hate stopped. That's the reality. People are furious, and it's led to where we've got to. If they had stopped these marches day one because of what they were doing, then my candidate in Rochdale would not be having death threats 2 days ago. That's the reality, and that's where this has gone. That's what happens when you have weak, feeble leadership demonstrated by the Met Chief boss, by Sadiq Khan, who's responsible for London security, by the Home Secretary and by the Prime Minister. I'm right, they're all weak, they're feeble, and that's led us to where we are.
OK, don't go anywhere, Richard, stay with us. Up next, the government has pledged over £30 million to bolster the security for MPs. Meanwhile, Labour's Harriet Harman wants politicians to work from home to stop them feeling under pressure. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking: evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that, and police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment, and the bureaucracy, and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police, and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under, and of course the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So we've still got Richard Tice with us. So, Richard, £30 million additional security measures for MPs. We know what happened to David Amos, murdered in his constituency surgery. Joe Cox was murdered in the street. They probably do need some help, don't they?
I'm afraid that's the consequence of what we've just been talking about. If you allow this extremism to grow unabated and emboldened because the police are not going to do anything about it, that's where you end up, spending tens and tens and tens of millions of pounds of taxpayers' cash to protect our elected representatives and those who are seeking election. You know, I'm now having to think about my own security, my candidate's security, because, you know, we're polling the third largest party, and we've got a very clear stance on this. And, you know, I've got the gratitude and support of huge chunks of the Jewish community saying, thank you for standing up for us against this absurdity.
And how important is it that MPs remain visible? Because a lot of MPs are now saying you've got to have an appointment for your constituency surgery. They normally advertise in the local paper on the website. If that all stops and we go down the Harriet Harman route, work from home, do all constituency surgeries remotely, that's breaking a link between people.
It is breaking the link, and it's dire, it's very sad, but I'm afraid these are the unintended consequences of what's happened. And real leadership by the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary says, this all stops. We're sick of it, the country's sick of it, we're not tolerating it. Bring about some proper respect for the laws of this country. And unless they do that, this gets worse and worse.
So but like in a practical terms, if you ban people from walking through London on a Saturday with a Palestinian flag, you don't mean the same thing. You're not tying those two together.
Actually, in terms of with the Palestinian flag, unfortunately, that has now been hijacked by the pro-Hamas extremists.
Yeah.
That is the reality, and that's, again, another unintended consequence. So, yeah, I'm afraid...
Go to Town Hamlets, where that Tory MP said it was parts that are a no-go zone. He's now changed his mind. Those flags are everywhere.
And I know, Bev, it's dire, but that's where this has gone, because the security teams and the police and the authorities and the leaders like Sadiq Khan, they have not led from the front by example.
But if you say to people you cannot protest at the weekend, what you're effectively saying is we will not provide the police support for these sorts of protests. They will turn up anyway.
No, that's not what you're saying. No, that's absolutely not what you're saying. You're saying you'll not protest at the weekend, we'll have the police, we'll have the TSG, and if you try and protest, we'll have the army on the streets. We're not tolerating it. In France, they deported an imam for basically for describing the French flag as satanic. He was deported within a day. That is leadership that people then start to respect law and order, and I think that's what the majority of the British people want.
Boris Johnson wasn't even allowed to use a water cannon when he was Mayor of London. Blocked by the Home Office.
If you are wet, feeble and gutless, that's where we end up. I'm none of those things, and if I was in charge, we would not be where we are today.
Water cannon would be rather good.
But the thing is, but people will protest anyway, so we can't say you're not allowed to protest.
We've got to give this list of candidates, Richard. We've got to give the full list of the candidates in Rochdale. They are... you should know them off by heart. Asar Ali, who will be on the candidate as Labour, Mark Coleman, Independent, Simon Danchett, Reform UK, Ian Johnson, Liberal Democrat, Paul Edson, Conservative.
George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain, Michael Howarth, Independent, William Howarth, Independent, Guy Otten, Green Party, Raven Rodent, Subordinate, Official Monster, Raven Looney Party, and David Tully, Independent. And also, have we got enough time now? That no,
we haven't.
We've run out of time.
We'll see you soon.
Richard Tice gave me a pen.
We'll see you when you get your new your first MP.
He lent me a pen. He lent me the Holiday Inn pen, which presumably...
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning, I'm Alex Burkle. Here's your latest GB News weather update. It is going to turn increasingly wet from the west as we go through today, but for the time being, there's some significant fog around, particularly across parts of England and Wales. Could cause some problems on the roads if you're heading out early. But in the west, it's a wet start to the day. Heavy rain across initially Northern Ireland, pushing into parts of Scotland, England and Wales. Likely to turn heavy, particularly over any higher ground, especially over the higher ground of Wales. All the time, though, across the southeast of the UK, staying largely dry, at least during daylight hours, and for most of us it's a mild picture, many places getting into double figures, but with some strong winds and in the rain it's going to feel pretty unpleasant at times. That rain then does reach the southeast as we go through this evening, with further rain pushing in from the west as we go through the end of the day. Perhaps the second band of rain this evening and overnight will be even more intense, so a greater chance of some localised impacts due to that. There will be some clearer skies following in from the northwest as we go through the night, perhaps turning a bit chillier here, but towards the southeast, another mild night here. As we go through into Thursday, a bit of a cloudy, wet picture to start the day across many parts of central, southeastern England. That rain eventually clearing away towards the southeast. A brighter story across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, though some blustery, showery weather pushing its way in and temperatures taking a bit of a drop. So although it will be mild again in the southeast, elsewhere turning a little bit chillier and perhaps some winteriness over the higher ground. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight are author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good morning, 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 28th of February. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
So more support for MPs. The government has committed an extra £31 million to give those politicians extra security measures.
And talking of security, royal protection verdict. The Duke of Sussex will learn any minute whether he's won a High Court challenge over a decision to change the level of his personal security whilst he's in the UK. We're going to bring you that as it breaks.
You've made your point. Well, that's the view of the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, about the pro-Palestinian protesters who bring London grinding to a halt every Saturday. He says, time to stop.
And Welsh farmers' fury. Well, thousands of fed-up farmers are protesting today against changes to their livelihood and the way that they have to run their farms. We're going to be talking to two of the key protagonists.
And no thanks, President Macron. Britain has rejected a completely balmy French plan to send NATO troops into battle in Ukraine.
And this might make you hungry. It's a huge day today for fish and chip lovers. Some of the top chippies in Britain will be competing at the National Fish and Chip Awards. This afternoon, we're going to be talking to two of the competitors. It might almost be my last supper fish and chips. Do you like fish and chips?
I love cod in batter, but I get bored with the chips halfway through. But when we were kids, Friday night, because we were Catholics, fish and chips.
You get bored
From the local
of
chippy.
chips?
I do.
What kind of sociopath are you? Who gets
I know,
bored
I
of
do,
chips?
I do. I've had enough of those. But and I put too much salt on them as well.
Well, that might be part of the reason why.
And too much tomato ketchup.
What makes good fish and chips? Let us know this morning. GBViews at gbnews.com. First, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Bev. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your top story. The Duke of Sussex will shortly learn whether he's won a High Court challenge over a decision to change the level of his personal security. He launched legal action against the Home Office over the decision that he should receive a different degree of protection when he visits the UK. The court heard that Harry believes his children cannot feel at home in the UK and it's not possible to keep them safe. But the government has dismissed his claim, saying the Duke is still entitled to protection on a case-by-case basis. MPs are facing threats to their security as part of a new £31 million government package. It follows growing concerns over MPs being targeted by protesters in recent months since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office said the package would be used to increase private sector security provisions, with all elected representatives to have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with on security matters. Policing Minister Chris Philp says democracy won't function without their safety.
It's vital for democracy that elected representatives, members of parliament and others can discharge their duties without fear or intimidation. If MPs can't do their jobs and use their judgment without any sort of external intimidation, then democracy itself can't function.
Thousands of farmers in Wales will be demonstrating outside the Senedd later in a protest over a number of issues they say are threatening the industry. Farmers are unhappy with proposals by the Change Farm subsidies, which would include a requirement for 10% of agricultural land to be used for trees. They would also be required to earmark another 10% for wildlife habitat. But the Labour government in the Senedd insists the change is necessary to fight climate change, but could be adjusted by the end of the consultation. Any savings from the cut to national insurance will be wiped out by Tory council tax rises. That's according to the Labour Party. It comes after the Chancellor promised the largest ever tax cut for workers, with a 2% cut to national insurance. But with 95% of councils expected to put up council tax by the maximum 4.99% from April, it's set to cancel out any savings. Labour Shadow Financial Secretary James Murray says it's another broken promise from the Tories.
The government are effectively forcing councils to put up council tax, and what that increase in council tax means is that any savings families might make from national insurance cuts this year are being wiped out. So when Rishi Sunak says that he's cutting taxes, it's another broken promise, because taxes are still on course to be their highest in 70 years. 25 tax rises in this Parliament alone, and the low economic growth combined with those tax rises is why people across Britain are feeling worse off.
Home Office chaos is to blame for asylum seeker backlog costing the taxpayer millions of pounds. That's the warning from a think tank. It found over 55,000 asylum seekers are stuck in a queue, waiting for their applications to be determined. The Institute for Public Policy Research is calling on the Home Office to start processing claims in a bid to clear the backlog. It comes as the asylum system cost £3.97 billion in the year 2022 to 2023, compared with £500 million a decade earlier. The future site of the UK's biggest electric vehicle battery manufacturing facility has been confirmed in Somerset. Indian conglomerate Tata says it will invest £4 billion in a brownfield site in the Bridgewater area of the county. The new plant is expected to create around 4,000 jobs and thousands more in the supply chain. Tata says battery production is set to begin there in 2026. And a 5-day walkout by junior doctors in the long-running pay dispute is set to conclude later. It's the 10th time doctors have stopped work since March last year. The British Medical Association is requesting a 35% pay rise, which the government says is unreasonable. Rishi Sunak denied trying to run down the NHS, insisting his government had delivered record funding for the health service. More than 1.3 million appointments and operations have already been cancelled or rescheduled since industrial action began. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
What is the time? It is 10:06 with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearson, Bev Turner.
Coming up, we're going to be talking about whether Prince Harry will win his... Well, we will find out whether he's won his legal battle against the government over his security arrangements. That should be breaking any minute. Also, you've been getting in touch at home. Donald says Lee Anderson was absolutely right in what he said. The political class in this country are and have been a bunch of cowards for years now, allowing this situation to happen. And Len says, what a tragedy that one of the few honest men we have in politics can't find a party where he can feel at home. Well, he might have found that party in the Reform Party, of course.
Yeah, and Rob says about Lee is the only person who speaks for millions. John says Lee Anderson is my hero. And Bertie says if Anderson and like-minded MPs formed a proper party, all Reform supporters would join it. That he obviously doesn't think Reform's a proper party.
I think Richard Tice would probably argue with that. Now, there are concerns about MPs being targeted by protesters in recent months since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war.
Home Secretary James Cleverly is calling for those pro-Palestinian marches which bring London and grind to every Saturday to stop now.
So we're joined in the studio by sketch writer and columnist for the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant. What is your assessment of this situation, Madeline, really, which has been over the last few days with Lee Anderson? What would be the negatives for the Conservative Party if he joins Reform? What does it say? What does it tell the electorate?
Well, I think what it would tell the electorate, it would signal that some would think that it would show that perhaps the Conservative Party is not serious enough about tackling Islamism, for example. I mean, I personally think that what Lee Anderson said was incredibly misguided, and he went too far. There was a grain of truth in what he said, but he took it too far, and it allowed Westminster to do what it loves best, to have a navel-gazing contest, rather than talking about the very real and substantive issue that last week's proceedings in the Commons raised, the fact that our democracy is essentially subverted by the intimidation of protesters.
I agree.
This is the important issue, and now Westminster gets to have its 4-day dialogue about what Lee Anderson said. And I think he did go too far, but there was some truth to what he said.
Yeah.
And he admits he used clumsy language.
Yeah, but he should have apologised for having used clumsy language. And I think it was the word about your mates. I think that was what really took it too far.
Which
and he could have made a similar point without going that far.
Which could have been suggesting a sort of nepotism.
Yes.
Which, or kind of a sort of corruption in terms of maybe, you know, looking after people, as politicians have done, of any particular religion or ethnicity since the beginning of time, pretty much.
But I think it was Islamists, you know, saying that you're mates with Islamists. That's quite, I mean, if I remember right.
And controlled by them.
Yes, exactly. That was tricky. But I think that now that it looks the Conservative Party. They will be accused of weakness. Lee Anderson is a very effective communicator and has lots of fans. And apparently there are lots of backbench Tory MPs who are upset with the PM because they desperately like having Lee Anderson come to their constituency events because he's a fun speaker and people enjoy hearing from him.
And the MPs I've talked to this week say they didn't need to make him apologise. They just should have said, clarify your remarks.
Yeah.
If he'd clarified his remarks in public, which he would have happily done, we saw the statement he put out, which the Tory Central Office suppressed for a couple of days. We brought it onto this programme first. And it was very, very thoughtful, I thought. And I agreed with absolutely pretty much everything he said in it.
Yeah, and I do understand his reservations about apologising, because it is true that as soon as one MP apologises for one thing, that leads to clarion calls from Labour for further apologies for all sorts of other things. They're now saying, oh, let's take the whip off Liz Truss for her sojourns in America. You know, it doesn't necessarily make the problem always go away.
I've heard the comparisons made between Richard Tice meeting Lee Anderson in a Holiday Inn at the weekend. And in fact, Richard Tice gave me a pen when he came in, and it's a Holiday Inn pen, so I'm keeping this as a bit of political memorabilia, by the way. This might be significant.
Did he sign the transfer deal with Lee Anderson? Is that the transfer deal pen?
Is this the pen?
Bit of
But
history.
they're drawing comparisons with the famous Tony Blair Gordon Brown meeting in the restaurant, which was called the Granita restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Is that overstating it a little?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think if Lee Anderson goes, it obviously helps. It helps Reform, because they then have someone who can actually make their points for them in Parliament, rather than relying on, you know, TV and newspapers to get that point across. And it will also distract Westminster from everything else. They're very fickle people in the Westminster lobby, and they'd much rather deal with this than any of the kind of underlying issues facing society.
And the challenge, of course, is that Reform have a recognition issue, and this will put them on the front page of the papers and raise awareness. Let's hear what Sadiq Khan said last night. He was at an award ceremony in London, I believe, and he took the opportunity on stage, of course, as he does, to make a point.
Responsible politicians also know that racism and prejudice, no matter what form it takes, regardless of whether it's anti-Semitism or, yes, Islamophobia, should be countered and condemned, not given a free pass or left unchallenged for electoral gain.
Now, that was at the National Kebab Awards last night.
I wasn't invited.
No, I quite like a kebab. I would have been quite liked an invitation. But the room didn't exactly give him a rousing applause, did they, Madeleine?
I couldn't quite tell, because if he was in full flow there, maybe it wasn't like a pause for applause. But he's not the most... He's quite an underwhelming speaker.
Yes, he is.
I've often thought that for I mean, say what you like about Boris Johnson and Ken Livingstone, they're both really strong personalities with massive charisma. I don't see how Sadiq Khan, I think, is quite apart from his shoddy ruling of this city, is quite a disappointing replacement for those two.
They were both big figures, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
Politicians.
And yet, he was voted in as London Mayor.
Oh,
He's highly likely to win again.
Yeah.
Oh,
There was a poll on the
Yes.
front of the Evening Standard last night giving him a 25-point lead.
But that's partly the fault of the Conservatives. I mean, I agree with Susan Hall on a lot, but normally you would choose someone better known. The Conservative candidate. You would choose someone better known and give them real support. Sean Bailey did extremely well, even though CCHQ was not giving him much help. He got 48, I think it was 52-48 at the last mayoral election. London is by no means a kind of sort of haven of Labour support necessarily. If the Conservatives have given up on London, I'm not sure why they did that.
Yeah, and the Muslim vote, Labour's traditionally relied on the Muslim vote. That is fracturing because of what's happening in Gaza, and there are independent Muslim candidates standing.
And actually, let's see what happens with Rochdale, but if someone like George Galloway or Jeremy Corbyn were to run their own campaign, that would perhaps splinter Labour's vote even more. Yeah,
I think Jeremy Corbyn's going to run again as an independent in his own constituency in Islington. That's my understanding. He's been the MP for 40 years.
OK, Madeleine, thank you. Madeleine Grant there. Now, for a GBNews exclusive, could British ports be at risk of sabotage from Chinese software?
Senior Tory MP has told GBNews the government's got to investigate China-made cranes at ports across Britain after the Americans announced plans to spend billions replacing their versions.
That's right. The concerns have been raised after Washington said the cranes manufactured by a Shanghai firm were a real strategic risk. Charlie Peters has joined us with more on this. Just explain that to us, Charlie.
Sure. So last week, the US announced plans to spend $20 billion over the next 5 years to replace cranes manufactured by a firm called ZPMC. It's actually a subsidiary of a company in China which the US has registered as a military entity of China. Now, it's spending this money because concerns have been raised by US intelligence personnel that this company is a serious strategic risk to the United States. They think that these cranes, which are 80% of all the ship-to-shore cranes in the US, can track information, can find out where freight is being sourced, its destination, but even more troublingly, they are concerned that they could sabotage cranes in the event of a conflict with China. We know that tensions are rising between Washington and Beijing. So since that announcement was made, not an awful amount of fuss was made in Britain or Europe about this because ZPMC, this firm, manufacture a significant portion of the world's cranes. So I had a look in Britain and I found that the vast majority of our major ports do have them. So I've been contacting ports for comment. Very few have spoken to me. Just one said that we have the steel, just have the hardware, not the software, but others won't confirm whether or not they are facing the same risk as in the US. And it's very important to note that the FBI said that they had found collection devices on a port in Baltimore. They said that this firm was a Trojan horse for Beijing, and cybersecurity experts think that they could sabotage those cranes.
What's the collection device?
They didn't go into further information there.
So that means they could... a collection device being something that can obtain digital internet data.
It's the data risk that they're saying here. It's worth noting that the United States military has for some time now, unofficially but only recently announced that it's been deliberately avoiding all ZPMC cranes in the US. When that amounts to 80% of all ship-to-shore cranes. That's quite a significant logistical effort to undertake, and they're doing it seriously because they clearly recognise a major risk.
How have these cranes been in place?
Decades. We found that Felixstowe Port, the largest port in Britain, accepted 2 more in 2018, but they've been operating there for many, many years. They won't tell me to what extent they're using software as well as just the hardware. But only one port has come out and said that they are only using the steel and not the software. So could Britain be facing the same risk? That's what Neil O'Brien, the founder of the China Research Group, has told me, saying that concerns need to be raised here. And we've also heard from analysts who've told GB News that has His Majesty's government seen the evidence collected by the US? Have they made their own assessment? And are we at risk of accepting a Trojan horse into Britain as well?
The cranes aren't just lifting stuff, they're lifting information as well.
That's right, they can be tracked, and that data could be accessed remotely by Beijing.
OK, thank you, Charlie. Thanks, Charlie.
It really is.
Right, still to come this morning, Prince Andrew took centre stage yesterday as the King and Prince William missed the memorial service that was in Windsor Castle. There he is, look at him, he likes to sort of...
He bustled to the front.
Doesn't he?
He absolutely bustled to the front. Because he's saying, I'm the senior royal, but he's no longer... Look, if you're listening on the radio now, he's bullying Captain...
Introducing everybody.
Tim Lawrence is the husband of the Princess Royal. Yeah, he's being... Look, he's got plenty of opportunity to go into the chapel, but he's hanging around because he's relishing being back in the public spotlight. It's a bad look, I'm afraid.
How extraordinary. Let us know what you think. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of 3 abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Turpentine.
10:21, you're with Britain's Newsroom and GBNews with Andrew Pierce-Turner. That voice noise off on the side was Stephen Pound, who can't be controlled, the former Labour MP, and the broadcaster Mike Parry, who will hopefully bring some control.
I hope so.
Yes.
Well, you were uttering the words King Constantine.
Oh, yeah, I thought it said King Turpentine. I'm sorry.
King Constantine. So this is about yesterday's story. This is a memorial service for the exiled Greek king.
Yeah.
And it was attended by lots of senior royals.
They were all there.
They were all there. Should have been William, but obviously mysteriously pulled out 45 minutes before. That's a bit odd, isn't it?
Very mysterious.
Very mysterious. And obviously King Charles being a little unwell. And who was there at the front of the parade?
We've got some images of it.
Bustling himself forward.
Look at that. Yeah. Prince Andrew, who is no longer a working royal, pushed his way to the front. Fergie's with him. Dear me, why do we want to see her?
Can you think of a sentence involving the words scrape, bottom and barrel?
Yeah. And he's loitering outside. He's introducing people to whoever's conducting the service for the late Greek king. And he's just revelling in every moment of it, isn't he? It's not a great look.
It's
an absolute disgrace, honestly. Those pictures go around the world. Now, very rarely do I have anything in agreement with the Daily Mirror, but I'm absolutely with them for their front page today. Prince still doesn't get it. Absolutely with it. His sense of self-awareness seems to have completely dissipated in the mist. You know, the man who will forever be remembered for giving a lady £12 million, despite the fact that he said, I've never met her, I've never done anything wrong.
I think his mother gave him
I'm sure you did, but what you've just said about him ambling his way to the front, he's grinning in this front page picture. He's grinning because he thinks, do you know what? I'm back there. And he elbowed his way to the front and thinks, I'm the head of the family. 3 paces behind him was the Princess Royal, who, in my view, should have led the parade.
Let's be honest, he's never been found guilty of anything.
Yeah, but he did, as Mike said, write a cheque for £12 million to a woman he claims he may never have even met.
Yeah.
That does suggest guilt.
And Bev, sorry to jump in again, the famous picture is of him and Jeffrey Epstein in Central Park after Epstein had been convicted and served a sentence for being a paedophile. Should a member of the British royal family be walking around Central Park with a man like that?
I watched the documentary, Stephen, the other day about Epstein that's on Netflix, and the way that he was living his life, the number of young girls that came through those doors, the massage beds, the art. It's seedy and depraved beyond belief.
It is.
He was his mate.
He was.
I know. And they was flying backwards and forwards to the island. No, it's disgusting. But look, I think what's terrifying about this is, firstly, this was a big deal. This one, there were crowned heads all over Europe with that.
Spain flew in for it especially.
You know, and of course, you know, King Constantine, which I think Mike said is a second cousin to King Charles.
Yeah.
And even worse, the Princess Royal, a person of impeccable, unimpeachable dignity and probity, there in her naval uniform, she should have been there instead of having this. I have to say, I use the word disgraced. I mean, I appreciate your point about legal, but he is disgraced.
Of course he is.
And to have him shoving and pushing and grinning his way to the front is an absolute insult.
And then inside the Abbey, he is in the front row, 4 seats away from Queen Camilla.
Yeah.
You see, I've mentioned the body language of Zara Phillips there, of course, Princess Anne's daughter, and her husband, the fabulous Mike Tyndall, former England rugby player. I rather wanted Mike Tyndall to go up to Prince Andrew,
pick him up,
but get him in a headlock and get him to the back of the queue. If anyone can, it's the amazing.
Or just pick him up and throw him aside.
Look at the Princess Royal there. Look, it's it's elegant, dignified.
But isn't this terrifying about what might happen to the royal family if it comes to the worst? You know, we still don't know the precise diagnosis for the king. We'd all like to, but we wish him the very best. But with the king out of the picture and Prince William out of the picture, the Prince of Wales, what are we left with?
And the Princess
what are we left with?
Recovering.
Absolutely.
Something that we do not know the detail of.
What
and
is
Harry in exile in America.
Absolutely. I mean, it is. It's devastating.
Yes, it is.
There is a theory. There are lots of theories about why William wasn't there. We hope it isn't anything to do with his wife's health. One theory is that he couldn't stomach the thought of being side by side with Prince Andrew.
That wouldn't surprise me at all, because when you look at it, it had to be something which really affected his life or his emotions very carefully, because he lives 5 minutes away. He literally lives a 5-minute walk away, and he only gave 45 minutes notice he wasn't coming. Now, that has to be something extremely desperate.
Maybe he saw the guest list and saw Prince Andrew was going to
that wouldn't be a shock, though, would it?
Well, no, the Royal Protection Squad will actually circulate a list of attendees, and that'll be everybody, and they normally circulate that only about 2 hours beforehand. It comes pretty very close.
So he may have just seen seen it.
He may have just seen it and you know, up with this I will not put.
Yeah.
Well, then surely...
But of course, the Greek royal family...
It's related to our royal family.
Yeah, but they invited Andrew.
Oh, did
the invitation came from the Greeks.
Well, that could well have been then why William wouldn't have known he was there until he got the list that Stephen's talking about.
But if that's the case, what power does Prince William have to say to his uncle, here, sling your hooks, stand
Well,
down?
not only that, he should actually say it to King Constantine's family. Look, I'm sorry, this is a delicate matter, but I have to say, I mean, you amaze me yet again, Andrew, your knowledge of the inner workings of European royalty.
The royal beat for 12 years. And yes, the invitation, and Constantine was a much-loved friend of the royal family. Not just
wasn't much loved by the Greek people.
No. Well, but yeah,
but he was
Prince.
Nor was Queen Frederica.
He used to go sailing with Prince.
Exactly, I was going to say. Very, very close.
Oh,
but I mean, you can think that Prince William is still learning the job, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
Why would he have even thought that the Greek royal family would have invited his uncle, Prince Andrew,
who's been banned from public life.
Exactly. That probably never occurred to him, although his courtiers should have been a bit more on the ball, shouldn't they, and said, look, we're keeping an eye on this.
It is a plausible theory for why he wasn't there.
It's a very plausible theory, because we don't know about anything else that's happened, and I think it would have leaked out by now if something else had happened.
If it's true, it means that Prince Andrew has more power than Prince William in that family.
No, I don't think it does. I think that
Prince William could have said to him, you're not going, full stop, don't go.
That is a very good point. Ultimately, he should have said, you're not coming. But we don't know how far into the arrangements that had gone. I mean, for instance, had Prince Andrew already arrived in the procession that was around the corner? You know,
You got Mike Tyndall. He can
I was just going to say, I'm with you on this one. I think Mike Tyndall, you know, slinging him off the pitch.
But the other thing, don't forget that the King had his brother with him when they walked to church at Sandringham on Christmas Day. It's a very pointed statement.
Yeah.
Do you think it was? I think it's just I think that was more to do with the dignity of the occasion. Well, you know, I think it was Christmas.
This is a family occasion, but this is a very public family.
Yeah, but at least Andrew wasn't at the head of the parade, if you see what I mean. He was a good 4 or 5 paces behind the King at Christmas.
Look at him, he's basking in it, isn't he?
I know, but
absolutely.
Loving it. Again, if you're listening on the radio, Camilla, you don't see. She arrives last because she
went into a side door.
Keeps her distance.
Side door. So she didn't see. So she had nothing. She was not seen with him.
I don't know if you've ever met Prince Andrew. You may have done in your royal duty. You interviewed him twice, right? Now, I've never met him, but I've been in company when he's been there, and I find him thickest, for want of a better word. No, I'm not joking. Individual, and it's usually been at a sporting event. At one time, it was the Open Golf, because he was a very keen golfer. It was Royal Lytham St Anne's. And people were putting points to him, and his eyes just glazed over. And I found him so arrogant in company. Everybody had to defer to him all the time, you know what I mean? Nobody was allowed to get closer than sort of 2 paces and all that.
And all his staff call him sir.
All his staff call him sir, and that's why he has no self-awareness. You know the story about the country house?
It sounds. I mean, he also has this ghastly ritual every night with all these teddy bears, which they have to be placed in order on his bed. I mean,
not by him, by.
Oh, good Lord, no. There is the royal teddy bear arranger pursuivant.
What's this country house story?
The country house story is he was staying in a country house, a sort of Brideshead Revisited type house, and he came down in the morning, walked into the breakfast room last of all, and then turned round and said, I think we'll do that again, and walked out. He expected everybody at the breakfast table to stand up as he walked into the room. So he went 3 paces into the room, turned around, I think we'll try that again, walked out again.
Let's move on.
To stand up.
That is extraordinary.
We've run out of time for just... I know, we have loads more stories, though, that we're going to be...
If only Mike and I could work from home, like Harriet Harman would.
Colleague Harriet Harman.
We're going to talk about that.
So fighting from home.
And also, bear in mind, gentlemen, that we've got this High Court decision any minute now about whether Prince Harry can have royal protection, including armed officers, when he is in the UK. We're going to bring you that.
Paid for by the taxpayer.
Did you see what Donald Trump said about him?
I did.
Oh, yeah,
fascinating.
We did. Don't go anywhere, though. Here is
No.
the very patient Sophia Wensler waiting for us.
Thanks, Bev. It's 10:30. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your headlines. The Duke of Sussex is due to learn whether he's won a High Court challenge against the government over his personal security. Prince Harry launched legal action over the Home Office's decision he should receive a different level of protection when he visits the UK. His lawyers told the court he was singled out and his children wouldn't feel at home if they couldn't be kept safe. The government says his claim should be dismissed because his protection is considered on a case-by-case basis. MPs facing threats to their safety will get extra security as part of a new £31 million government package. It follows growing concerns over MPs being targeted by protesters in recent months since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office said the package would be used to increase private sector security provisions, with all elected representatives to have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with on security matters. Thousands of farmers in Wales will be demonstrating outside the Senedd later in a protest over a number of issues they say are threatening the industry. Farmers are unhappy with proposals by the changed farm subsidies, which would include a requirement for 10% of agricultural land to be used for trees. But the Labour government in the Senedd insists the change is necessary to fight climate change, but could be adjusted by the end of the consultation. And any savings from the cut to national insurance will be wiped out by Tory council tax rises. That's according to the Labour Party. It comes after the Chancellor promised the largest ever tax cut for workers with a 2% cut to national insurance. But with 95% of councils expected to put up council tax by the maximum 4.99% from April, it's set to cancel out any savings. Labour Shadow Financial Secretary James Murray says it's another broken promise from the Tories. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2624 and €1.1687. The price of gold is £1,603 and the FTSE 100's at 7,638 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, still to come, we're going to be crossing over to the Senedd in Wales, where thousands of farmers are protesting in their tractors about the Welsh Government, the way they're treating. But first, the new GB News series, Innovation Britain. We're looking at the success of British manufacturing around the country.
Today we are at Middlesex Aerospace in Basingstoke, and I'm joined by Lawrence Fold, the owner of the business. And I want to find out, Lawrence, why engineering is so important to the UK.
Well, engineering, and aerospace engineering in particular, produces a whole series of very well-paid, interesting jobs. The products that were all made in this factory, ultimately speaking, pretty much all go abroad. Even though they're integrated into systems in this country, but they'll wind up in Airbus, Boeing and other major aircraft facilities around the world. So exporting is really important.
Are we becoming competitive globally?
We remain competitive globally. Just because areas have got cheap labour, it doesn't mean that they're very good at producing sophisticated components. And it's that we do here, is produce technology at the very high end of manufacturing.
And how are we addressing the skills gap, and how important is this?
We've had our own apprenticeship programme every year since 1950, so we continue to train here, train our own apprentices, and build up the skills of our own people. That's been really key to our success over the years, and as a national thing, training and education for all of our people is very important. I mean, it's very much a truth to say that if you think education is expensive, try ignorance.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones is the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the old tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're going to be debating whether the government is right to bring in a tax on vapes. That's what the rumour is about next week's budget. And we're going to be talking to the director of the UK's Vaping Association. Don't miss that.
First, though, thousands of Welsh farmers are gathering in Cardiff today to protest the government's new climate action plans that farmers must follow if they want to continue accessing financial support.
And to be clear, that's the Welsh Labour government. It's not. It's because it's devolved. One of those supporting the cause is Clarkson's Farm star, and you all know him, Caleb Cooper.
That's right. So, is the Green Agenda destroying farming? Well, joining us now from Cardiff is our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Hello, Olivia. Good morning. What's going on down there? Just explain to people why these farmers are so unhappy.
Hello, Bev. Yes, there's about 10,000 Welsh farmers expected to descend on the Senedd today. And what they're trying to do is change the Labour Welsh government's minds over a planned system of new subsidies. Now, under these new subsidies, farmers would be paid for simply looking after the land for the environment rather than producing food. And specifically, to qualify for these subsidies, farmers would have to agree to give over 10% of their land to growing trees. Now, in some areas of Wales, that would be very difficult indeed. Cliff areas, for example, giving 10% of land over to trees would be near impossible. And farmers say that the burden of that, the burden of giving over their land to the environment rather than growing the food that they've been producing for hundreds of years in some cases with family farms, would just be too much. They say that farms would have to close up and down the Welsh countryside. It's very reminiscent of the scenes that we saw in Paris just a few weeks ago, and similar to what we've seen in Spain too. Now, I'm here with Andrew Davies, who's the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, and he opposes the plan. Andrew, can you just explain a little bit more to me about why this has gone down so badly with Welsh farmers?
Well, let's not forget, people need food to survive and live on their everyday existence. So we're not talking about an industry here that isn't required to feed the nation. And if we don't have farmers, we don't have food. And by the government's own figures, if this scheme goes ahead unchanged, 5,500 farmers will lose their livelihoods, 125,000 cattle will be lost in Wales, 800,000 sheep, and £200 million worth of economic activity will be lost. So it'll be a devastating impact on rural communities the length and breadth of Wales. And what we've got to do by the show of strength here today is press on the government that they need to change, they need to listen. It's not too late, they can change things around, and let's hope they do.
Thank you. I mean, there are those who say that farmers have got to do their bit to contribute to the net zero goal that we're all working towards. What would you say to that?
Well, everyone accepts that, and farmers are an integral part of that. But when they're talking about putting 10% of farmland over to trees, that has a devastating impact on the value of the farms, the productivities of the farms. And if you're a tenant farmer, for example, the landlord most probably wouldn't give you permission to do it anyway. So you wouldn't be able to access the support payments that Welsh Government are making available to you. So we can't allow this to go forward and change. And that's what the protest is about today, in the greatest numbers that I've certainly seen as a Senedd member since I've been here since 2007.
I've spoken to some people within the Labour Party who say that the Conservatives' plan for England is actually pretty similar to what Labour's doing in Wales. Do you agree with that characterisation?
No, I don't, because ultimately many farmers now in Wales are saying we wish we had what's going on in England, where there's more of a menu choice of what you could do for your farm rather than an imposition on rules and regulations that the Welsh Government are looking to impose. But as I said, don't forget, if we don't have farmers, we don't have food, and we need food in our everyday lives, and food security is as important as environmental security in the world of uncertain changes and circumstances.
Thank you very much. What a clear message there from the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, that food security is just as important as environmental security for the future of the planet. That's it from me for now, but I'll be back with you later today with more from this protest at the Welsh Senedd.
Thanks, Olivia. Interesting piece in the paper today.
Really interesting in the Times today. So you will know on this programme, because we've talked about Gareth Wyn-Jones, who's a terrific farmer. He farms in North Wales. He's going to join that protest today on his tractor, no doubt. He's had to install security systems after the police warned him about a death threat made against his family. Isn't that appalling? Yeah. A farmer just campaigning because he says the Welsh Labour government is going to destroy his income, turning his farm into more and more trees and rewilding. And that's
solar panels.
Yeah, solar panels. It's all this dash to net zero, and that's when he gets the death threat.
And reminder, The Guardian ran a piece and stitched these people up on Sunday. When did the left become so against the working person? It baffles me. Up next, attacks on vaping, safeguarding children, and as an attack on those who are trying to quit smoking. We're going to have our friend from the vaping industry in the studio to give him a hard time. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in the Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, it's the budget next week, and I know you can barely wait. The excitement is building so much. We're getting the budget on Wednesday, and it has been reported that one of the measures will be a tax for the first time on vapes.
That's right. Vapes are subject to VAT, but unlike tobacco, they're not subject to excise duty, making them cheaper to purchase.
So if a levy is added to vaping, could this be the thing that dissuades under 18s from taking up the habit?
No. Looking on the screen, right, we're joining the studio. This is a poster here. Now with up to 1,000 puffs. We're joined by friend of the show, Director General of the Vaping Industry Association, John Dunn, who, all credit to you, John, we give you a kick in every time we see you.
Do.
And now you've come into the studio. How do you defend that poster? If we just see it one more time, this is being sold on the idea that it's got 1,000 puffs in attractive colours, pink and blue. That's not trying to stop you smoking. That's trying to encourage you to vape.
Absolutely not. What this is doing is highlighting how efficient these devices have become. So all of the devices run on the same amount of e-liquid. What's happening to the devices is they're becoming more efficient in how they utilise that liquid. And that's why it's able to deliver more puffs per device. It's not doing anything different.
But presumably you vape to start to reduce your dependency on nicotine. Because what that's doing is saying you can still get tons of nicotine from your vape.
But the amount of puffs has nothing to do with the amount of nicotine that's in the device. The amount of nicotine stays the same. So what smokers are doing is they're moving away from a product that kills 220 of them every single day to a product that's far safer for them to use and far healthier for them to use. But they still have to get the amount of nicotine that their body is craving. And what happens is, with a device like that, it's generally a higher nicotine level. But then when they switch from a disposable or a pod system onto an open tank system, because the devices are more powerful, they use less and less nicotine. So the most popular levels of nicotine in the country are 6 milligram and 3 milligram in the open tank systems. But most of the disposables and the pod systems are at that 18 to 20 milligram level, which is the maximum we can have in this country.
Why shouldn't they be taxed? Fags are taxed, drink is taxed, alcohol is taxed.
But they already are taxed. And they do have import duty, so what the statement said earlier on.
But there's no excise duty on it.
There's an import duty of 6.5%.
How much are tax on cigarettes?
Cigarettes kill 220 people a day. So massive amounts of taxes, absolutely yes. But this is an attack on smoking cessation. Vaping is the most popular way that people quit smoking in this country. So if nicotine is the problem, why is the government not going to tax gums and patches, which also contain nicotine, which are only at a 5% VAT rate?
It's also the most popular way of getting teenagers addicted to nicotine. Look at these adverts and tell me that is not meant to appeal to children.
What I will tell you is that product is illegal in this country, but the laws that we have currently are not even being enforced. So the government is talking about bringing in more laws when they can't even enforce the ones that are here already.
How much difference will it make to the price of these vapes, John, if this tax is included on there?
Well, it depends on what what they actually come out with. There's a lot of speculation at the moment. The budget is next week.
Have they talked to you about it?
No, absolutely not.
You've had no contact with the Treasury?
Nope, and I met with MPs yesterday, and they have no idea what's in this. So this is absolutely coming from Rishi Sunak's office. This is not coming from anywhere else. So what we've got to be really careful here of is that the highest smoking areas are in the most deprived areas of the UK. And we're trying to convince these smokers to move to something else. So if you make them more expensive, they're not going to do that.
You're just trying to boost your profits. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to flog more vapes to boost your profits. Why do you go on about this sort of very altruistic? We're trying to get people saying you're trying to flog as many as you can, which is why you get so many of them designed to attract young people.
Listen,
get them early, get them for good.
Listen, one of the things that's very interesting about this is that entrepreneurs solved a problem that the healthcare industry was failing for decades. Pharmaceutical companies make profits from selling pills, from selling patches, from selling gums, but I don't see you attacking them. And they make far more profits than this industry does.
You know why?
This industry is solving a problem they couldn't.
Patches are not cool, John. Patches and gum that have nicotine in them appeal to an older generation who might just want to have a little hit of nicotine when they're in the office and whatever, they're addicted for decades. These products are getting children hooked on nicotine. They must be limited.
I absolutely agree they should be limited to children, but not limited to adults who are successfully using these to quit smoking. Patches and gums have failed for decades. They don't work. This product is twice as effective as all of the other methods combined. And this government is going to...
Do you know what? I've never met a vapor who is vaping to quit nicotine. Have you?
Absolutely.
No.
Absolutely.
All my vaping friends, and there are many, and there are people vaping in this room behind us probably right now because you can get away with it in offices because nobody smells it. And even though it's not legal, people are doing it.
Well,
we're going to the we're at a dinner tonight. We're at the RTS Awards tonight. Every time you go to any sort of zhuzhi-do round a table now, people used to go out and have a cigarette. Now they sit at the table and they vape, John. It's not working.
Well, first of all, let me correct you on that. It is not illegal to vape inside. It is only illegal to smoke inside. Right. It is up to every premises to make their own rules and regulations.
So children can then just do that in the classroom?
Well, adults can do it as well. And 4.6 million vapers in this country, adult vapers who were previous smokers and have successfully quit, are doing that as well. But absolutely, we have put in place lots of things and suggestions to the government to stop young people from getting...
Hang on, well, help me out about something called fidget spinners.
Again,
vaping.
Absolutely illegal.
Can you explain what that is?
It's a fidget spinner that is a vape.
A fidget spinner is a child's toy, and it can be used by adults who have attention issues. And it's a fidgety thing. You will all be familiar with them. They were a massive crave. You can get those that double as a vape now.
All about getting kids.
But you are just highlighting the fact that the current laws are not being enforced. So MHRA in this country is the ones that approve vapes to come onto the market. They don't look at packaging. They don't look at product design. That's up to trading standards once the products are in the market. And I've highlighted this to the government. I've highlighted this for the last 5 years, and they don't take action.
Are the MHRA conflicted in that decision in any way?
The MHRA are absolutely behind that suggestion.
Do they receive any money from the vaping industry?
No, they don't. But the current remit that they have does not allow them to look at packaging and product design. That's in trading standards remit, which I think is backwards.
Do you vape?
All right, John.
I do indeed.
I
smoke 3 packs a day.
Are you trying to quit vaping?
No, because I enjoy it.
Because there you go. John, lovely to see you, Director General of the Vaping Industry Association, John Dunn, who as an adult is free to do what he wants. Don't go anywhere. We've got to take a quick break for the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the latest forecast for GB News. Cloud increasing from the west today with rain moving east, but it will be milder for most of us by the afternoon. It has been a chilly but bright start in the east. However, we've got these weather fronts moving in now. A warm front bringing areas of cloud and some outbreaks of rain. That rain will be persistent in the west. It'll be heavy at times, particularly over parts of Wales and later on northwest England. But it does stay dry throughout much of the afternoon in the far east, especially East Anglia and the southeast. where we cling on to some brighter skies, but elsewhere it's largely cloudy, the breeze picking up. That breeze is bringing milder conditions, so generally temperatures at 9 to 12 Celsius. It's not going to feel as fresh as more recent days. Then into the evening, the bands of rain move east. There'll be some heavy bursts at times, again, mostly over western hills. And as the night goes on, the main focus for the rain pushes south and eastwards, with showers replacing the wet weather across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Colder air moving in here, with some of these showers falling as snow over the Scottish mountains by dawn. And the wind really picks up in the northwest, with gales across the north and northwest of Scotland, 60-mile-per-hour gusts. And it's going to feel colder, but there will be some brighter spells in between the showers. Meanwhile, further southeast, a mild start to the day, but a damp start, and that rain hangs on into the afternoon. 12 Celsius for London, 6 Celsius there in the north of Scotland.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
So coming up, Prince Harry will discover quite shortly whether he's won that High Court battle against the Home Office over a decision to downgrade his security when he visits the UK. He wants armed protection and he wants you, the taxpayer, to pay for it. Thought he'd left the royal family.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 28th of February. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Thank you for joining us this morning. So, royal protection verdict. The Duke of Sussex, Harry, will learn whether he's won a High Court challenge over a decision to change the level of his personal security. Any minute now.
And... More support for MPs. The government has committed an additional £31 million to give politicians extra security measures.
You've made your point. That is the message from the Home Secretary to pro-Palestine protesters as he urges them to stop their weekend demonstrations in London.
And no thanks, Mr. President. Britain has rejected a French plan to send NATO troops into the Ukraine. What was he thinking of?
And it's a big day today for fish and chip lovers. Some of the top chippies in Britain will be competing at the National Fish and Chip Awards this afternoon. We've already discovered that Andrew Pearce gets bored of chips. Bored of chips. You're bored of chips, you're bored of life.
No, but they're better if you have a pickled egg.
Oh, no, that's just perverse. No, chips...
And a pickled onion.
Fish and chips with gravy and mushy peas.
Gravy?
I'm a mancunian.
Oh, my God.
Am I right? GB Views.
Yeah.
GBNews.com. And maybe a little pot of curry sauce on the side as well. Let us know your thoughts this morning. GB Views at gbnews.com. First, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Bev, thank you. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your top story this hour. The Duke of Sussex is due to learn whether he's won a High Court challenge against the government over his personal security. Prince Harry launched legal action after the Home Office decided he should receive a different level of protection when he visits the UK. His lawyers told the court he was singled out and his children wouldn't feel at home if they couldn't be kept safe. The government says his claim should be dismissed because his protection is considered on a case-by-case basis. MPs facing threats to their safety will get extra security as part of a new £31 million government package. It follows growing concerns over MPs being targeted by protesters in recent months since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office said the package would be used to increase private sector security provisions, with all elected representatives to have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with on security matters. Policing Minister Chris Philp says democracy won't function without their safety.
It's vital for democracy that elected representatives, members of parliament and others can discharge their duties without fear or intimidation. If MPs can't do their jobs and use their judgment without any sort of external intimidation, then democracy itself can't function.
Thousands of farmers in Wales will be demonstrating outside the Senedd later in protest over a number of issues they say are threatening their industry. Farmers are unhappy with the proposals by the Change Farm subsidies, which would include a requirement for 10% of agricultural land to be used for trees. They would also be required to earmark another 10% for wildlife habitat. But the Labour government in the Senedd insists the change is necessary to fight climate change, but could be adjusted by the end of the consultation. Councils are warning of drastic cuts to services despite government bailouts. The Local Government Association claims further funding should be available in the Chancellor's budget next week, or there could be a risk of worsening financial crisis. The government has already made an extra £600 million available for the council for 2024 to 2025. More than two-thirds of councils said they'll be making savings on services such as waste collection, road repairs and library and leisure services. And any savings from the cut to national insurance will be wiped out by Tory council tax rises. That's according to the Labour Party. It comes after the Chancellor promised the largest ever tax cut for workers, with a 2% cut to national insurance. But with 95% of councils expected to put up council tax by the maximum 4.99% from April, it's set to cancel out any savings. Labour Shadow Financial Secretary James Murray says it's another broken promise from the Tories.
The government are effectively forcing councils to put up council tax, and what that increase in council tax means is that any savings families might make from national insurance cuts this year are being wiped out. So when Rishi Sunak says that he's cutting taxes, it's another broken promise, because taxes are still on course to be their highest in 70 years. 25 tax rises in this Parliament alone, and the low economic growth combined with those tax rises is why people across Britain are feeling worse off.
Home Office chaos is to blame for asylum seeker backlogs costing the taxpayer millions of pounds. That's the warning from a think tank. It found over 55,000 asylum seekers are stuck in a queue waiting for their applications to be determined. The Institute for Public Policy Research is calling on the Home Office to start processing claims in a bid to clear the backlog. It comes as the asylum system cost £3.97 billion in the year 2022 to 2023, compared with £500 million a decade earlier. A 5-day walkout by junior doctors in a long-running dispute over pay is set to conclude later. It's the 10th time doctors have stopped work since March last year. The British Medical Association is requesting a 35% pay rise, with the government saying it's unreasonable. Rishi Sunak denied trying to run down the NHS, insisting his government had delivered record funding for the health service. More than 1.3 million appointments and operations have already been cancelled or rescheduled since industrial action began. And in some breaking news, the High Court in Belfast has ruled provisions to ensure conditional immunity from prosecution for Troubles offences in the government's Legacy Act are not compatible with human rights legislation. The challenge was brought by a group of victims of the Northern Ireland Troubles. We're expecting a news conference shortly. We'll bring you more on this developing story later. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Breaking news, and who better to break the news than our very own royal reporter Cameron Walker?
Yes, this is concerning the Duke of Sussex and his High Court case against the Home Office over their decision not to provide him with the same degree of police protection when he's in the UK, as he's no longer a working royal. Prince Harry has lost his High Court judgment against the Home Office. The court has found that there has been no unlawfulness in reaching the decision by the Home Office on the 28th of February 2020. That's way back when Prince Harry stood back as a working member of the royal family. Any departure from policy was justified. The decision was not irrational. It goes on and on and on. So, just to recap slightly, Prince Harry argued that it was unfair for RAVEC, this Home Office committee, which is made up of police officers, senior government figures, including the Home Secretary, and members of the royal household, which included the late Queen's private secretary, as part of this committee, to change the level of police protection he got when he's in the UK, because, of course, it's all taxpayer funded, isn't it, this police protection? And because Prince Harry no longer a working member of the royal family, RAVEC made the decision that he should not be entitled to that.
He was trying to almost say this was an act of spite. They were attacking him because he'd had the temerity to walk away. And this is saying, absolutely, that's not the case.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what the judge has handed down, Mr Justice Lane. He says that it wasn't not irrational and it was justified and there was no unlawfulness.
So if it was a judicial review, wasn't it?
A judicial review,
so in a
on the High
judicial
Court.
review, you have to prove that the decision has been irrational. And that is what the judge has said. It is a rational decision, given the circumstances, to change his protection level.
Exactly. We've got a slight problem with this hearing, is that a lot of it was actually held in private without journalists due to national security issues, perhaps understandably. Prince Harry argued, or his lawyers argued, that he was treated less favourably than other members of the royal family. He also argued that it's not possible to keep his own children, Archie and Lilibet, safe in the UK because of the decision of RAVEC, and said because he had such a falling out with members of the royal household when he stood back as a working member of the royal family, as well documented in his memoir Spare, that there was some kind of prejudice against him, and they were the allegation was they were influencing government's policy when the Home Office made decisions to take away his security, and the court has argued, or the court has found, that is not the case.
But here's an important point, Cameron. If he's here on So at the Queen's coronation, for instance, he had exactly the same level of royal protection he would have had if he was still a member of the royal family. It's if he comes here privately, he's going to have to fork out for his own security.
Yeah, and lawyers argued that the protection he has received when he's come back to the UK post-Megxit has been, and I quote, inadequate.
That's what his lawyer said.
That's what his lawyer said. So there was an incident during the Well Child Awards, I believe it was 2021, where he alleges his car was chased by paparazzi because he did not have that outriders, police outriders.
But isn't this about guns, this issue, fundamentally? It's partly about who pays for it, but isn't it because, as a private citizen, he can't have armed protection? And if he had won today, that would have left the gates open for any private citizen, be that a Russian, a Chinese, a Saudi, anyone coming over here who considers themselves to be rather important and possibly a threat, could have security with guns.
So as it stands, Prince Harry in the United States at the moment has his own his own private protection, which he pays for, which are armed and do have guns.
But everybody's armed in America.
Yeah, exactly. And the Home Office and the British government and law says that Prince Harry cannot take his arms US protection to the UK, and therefore Prince Harry argues he needs that armed British police, taxpayer-funded police protection in the UK. The Home Office, as it stands, does Prince Harry's protection on a case-by-case basis. Prince Harry has to give 28 days' notice before he comes to the UK so they can process whether or not Prince Harry warrants protection. If it's an official trip, as you say, Andrew, like the Queen's funeral or the coronation, he's likely to get it. If it's a private trip, it could well be disputed. And this is just for Harry's protection, not his family. So we'll wait and see if there's any statements from either side.
So when he came over to see his father, we knew in advance he was coming over. Which would have alerted anybody who wanted to be potential. Yeah. So would he have had protection for that?
Well, we saw police cars with him, and that, I did scratch my head and think, well, why on earth is that? He needs to give 28 days' notice. I suspect, because of the circumstances, his father had cancer, had recently been diagnosed. There is flexibility, but remember, Prince Harry brought this judicial review, well over a year ago now. The trial happened, a 3-day trial happened in December. So this has been a long time coming, and I think Prince Harry was pretty angry a couple of years ago. He was firing off all these different legal cases. I think now perhaps if he was in the same position today, would he have brought this judicial review? We're not sure, but clearly Prince Harry feels his family are not safe in the UK. But we'll have to see what he comes back with.
He's going to get himself into a little bit of a difficult position as well, isn't he? Because if President Trump is re-elected in America and he gets kicked out of America because of his previous smoking admissions on his visa application form, and he comes back, he won't want to come back here if he doesn't feel that he's safe enough. Where's he going to end up?
They can go to Canada, which is where they went initially. They can go to Canada.
They'd have a lovely time there.
I'm sure Canada would be thrilled to have them because we don't want them back here.
Well, they were back in Canada a few weeks ago for the Invictus Games year countdown, weren't they? But, I mean, the fact is, Prince Harry is still fifth in line to the throne, so there is, in theory, a bit of a target on his back. That's what Prince Harry argues. But, of course, is it justified for taxpayers to pay for constant round-the-clock police protection? No. On a case-by-case basis, Prince Harry is provided with police protection. He says it's inadequate. The Home Office and clearly the judge agrees that that's not the case.
He's chosen to live the multi-millionaire playboy lifestyle in the United States and California. If that's his choice, I'm afraid if you've made your bed, you've got to lie in it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And they've made millions and millions and millions. They're very wealthy. He was left money by his mother, money by the Queen Mother, and they've made a lot of money out of Netflix and Spotify, selling out the royal family.
Just before you go, we reckon we have solved the mystery of why William did not go to that memorial service yesterday. We are convinced, aren't we, Mr P?
He did not want to be with share the limelight with Prince Andrew.
I reckon he found out Prince Andrew was going and he said, no, I am not, and that is it. Then you go, well, what we get? His secretary's going, well, what am I going to tell blooming GB News? And he says, tell them it's a personal issue.
Personal issue. Well, he was pictured in the summer driving his uncle, Prince Andrew, in a car at Balmoral. I understand he wasn't particularly pleased about that, but I think pulling out of a service because you don't want to be seen with your uncle is pretty far-fetched.
Well, I don't think it's far-fetched, but I do think it shows that Prince Andrew wields a lot more influence in that family than William at this moment. If you are first in line to the throne, you should be able to say, under these extraordinary circumstances, I'm sorry, Uncle Andrew, you're not going. You're not going because we need to represent this family. At this time when my dad isn't well, my wife isn't well, I need to be there with Princess Anne, with Zara, with Mike, and show us for being the positive that we are, not with
Karen,
him in the front of the...
And he is absolutely revelling in it, isn't he, Prince Andrew?
He loves it. Well, he
Bustled
stopped.
to the front, stopped hanging around, introducing people, introducing the Princess Royal's husband to various people, sat in the front row.
Yeah.
In the service.
So it's tricky for the British royal family, isn't it? I do understand that it was the Greek royal family that invited Prince Andrew rather than the British. But of course, it's a private family event, isn't it? And that's the issue. Prince Andrew is still a private Windsor family member, but not a working member of the royal family.
But I checked the Court Circular and the Telegraph and the Times today. There is the royals at that service. So that was down for senior royals as a working function. They don't mention him. They just say other members of the royal family attended.
Interesting.
Thanks, Cameron. It also just shows you that Prince Andrew is not bothered about the royal family. He's not bothered about the future of the royal family, because if he would read the room and know that it was a day when he should have, if he wanted to go in the back entrance with the Queen. Right, still to come, Britain has slapped down French President Emmanuel Macron's ridiculous idea to send NATO troops into Ukraine. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engine, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have two SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a time, but I had two brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you could run down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
The growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks, or they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Oh, we're chattering away here. It's 11:19, Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Mike Parry and Stephen Pound are back in the studio with us. Right, we're all sort of speculating and also discussing, Stephen, this news about Prince Harry now not being able to have his paid protection. We're looking at Prince Andrew at the memorial yesterday, speculating as to whether that means...
And they say we're not obsessed with the royal family. I mean, do you know what's a really bad look with Prince Harry? I mean, to be honest, Prince Harry from, morning till dusk is a bad look. But MPs are just getting an extra £30 million for personal protection at the present time. And Prince Harry's being denied it. Well, I'm sorry, there's a little bit of an imbalance there.
They're working. Yeah. They're working public figures. Harry's opted out.
Yeah. I have to say, how refreshing to hear you say that MPs work. I mean,
no, Stephen, I'm a fan of it.
If it was up to Harriet Harman, they'd be working from home, though, right?
Exactly.
We're going to come on to that, though, in just a moment.
Yeah.
But, Mike, stay with this royal story, then, just for a little while.
Well, I'm very, very pleased. I mean, I was trying to work out the details of it. It is, in fact, Prince Harry loses legal challenge against the Home Office.
Right.
So that's not directly Scotland Yard, who've said we can't give you our officers.
Yeah.
This is a matter of principle through which the British government have expressed their opinion and what is right and wrong. And I think that makes it a completely different story, I mean, people could have said, well, it's wrong of Scotland Yard not to say they'll look after Harry, but if the Home Office say...
It would have been said it can't, don't forget.
Exactly. But, look, I'm so pleased because I heard one of you, I think it was yourself, Andrew, earlier in this show, that he would get the level of protection that Scotland Yard give to people of his stature anyway, so he didn't need to... But in my opinion, anybody in this country gets full protection of the police at all times, or at least they should.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree that Harry is more of a famous person, not a member of the royal family more, but a celebrity, and so the police are equipped to give extra attention and extra resources to that, which they do, whether Harry paid for it or not.
Sorry, Mike. Look, I can think of a sentence involving the words cake and eat it. I mean, if you withdraw from public life, you withdraw from your royal duties, you actually withdraw to your castle in Montecito, then I'm sorry, you cannot expect the British taxpayer, to actually be paying for your security.
No, but he didn't want that, did he, Stephen? He wanted to be able to say, look, I've made $100 million in Montecito and I'm going to use a couple of $1 million of that to buy up a couple of British bobbies.
With guns.
This is
the point. It's all about the guns, isn't it? And obviously this is probably partly to do with his wife, because she's used to a gun culture.
Yes, that's true.
We don't actually have a massive problem with guns in this country.
No.
He doesn't need to necessarily...
He was also saying about when his children are over here. I mean, you don't take your children out of school and bring them over to here. It just seems the whole thing seems odd.
We haven't seen them anyway.
Yeah. But the other thing, of course, Harry is, as he constantly tells us, he's a trained killer who killed 27 people in Helmand Province.
Yeah, so
does he need protection?
Yeah.
Or do we need protection?
Well, he's the victim again, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's done it again. What they're so good at, those two, is casting
Poor me.
But is it also a sense of reminding the world of I am a very important person? It doesn't matter whether I'm in the royal family or not. When I come here, I need a convoy of 4 cars. One of them's got to have armed policemen in it. I mean, that's what I get the feeling about.
His judicial review, he was trying to point out that he was the victim of some form of vindictive spite.
Yes.
Because I've had the temerity to walk away from the royal family. This is how they're repaying me.
Yes.
And the judge is quite clear. There's nothing irrational about what the Home Office did.
Absolutely. And it is the British government who is behind this decision, not... What I'm saying is, it's not like it's an individual at the top of the Metropolitan Police or something,
You could argue, of course, that Harry's own fear is rational because of what happened to his mother. If you've lost your mother at that age and you have a different relationship with death, as you inevitably will if you lose your mum when you're younger, under circumstances which were of a violent nature, be that an accident or not, maybe he's right to ask.
I'm sorry, Princess Diana actually had a close protection officer in the car with her.
She did.
At the time.
The only one who survived.
Yeah, well, he had a seatbelt on.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yes,
right.
In the front.
I mean, on Henri Paul, I have to say, now the details coming out about his blood alcohol levels.
Well, he was drunk. He was a drunk and his body was full of alcohol and drugs.
Ex-Foreign Legion, wasn't he?
Is it plausible, do you think, that Prince William pulled out of the memorial service yesterday because Prince Andrew was there? Could it be to do with the fact that this close friend of William's as well, it's on the front page of the paper today, a young royal, 45 years old, Kingston, what's his name?
Tom Kingston.
Tom Kingston, thank you. Not that he'd be a household name or face to any of us, really, but a friend of William's. He also died on Sunday.
He dated Pippa Middleton.
That's right, so a close friend of the family. Could it be that he didn't go to the wedding because of the loss of his friend?
Yeah.
Sorry, the memorial service. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, I think in some way, I mean, look, we can talk around the houses about this one, we can go around the block, we won't know for certain. I doubt we ever will know, to be perfectly honest. But I like to think there's two options. One is he didn't want to be in the same city, let alone the same church as Prince Andrew. The second thing is maybe the Tom Kingston thing is very close to home. They were very much from the same group, they dated the sisters, they were very, very close to each other. The thing there, though, is that I think Tom Kingston died on Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, and we're talking a couple of days later.
Yeah. And also, I'm sorry, the Queen had that very stiff upper lip, you've got to get on with it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, a good friend of his.
The show goes on and all that.
This is very important. And this was his godfather's memorial service.
It was.
The King of Spain flew in for it, a very important
I agree. Stephen's just pointed out how close he was to the royal family now, and we know that Kate, of course, is in her own recovery period. If Pippa had got terribly emotional, her sister, about it, and that had just got through to William, is that a possibility that he thought it would be disrespectful to go public, you know, 48 hours after one of his best friends had died?
Why, Mike, it's just easier sometimes for the royal family just to tell us.
Yeah, I agree, because we're now all really, really speculating, aren't we?
But there's one thing, Mike, there's one thing we can all agree on.
Well, in fairness, they did put out a statement saying that the Princess of Wales continues to do well, they said, you know.
Can we not agree that the one thing that is indisputable about this is that Prince Andrew is bang out of order?
Yeah, completely out of order and very, very selfish.
It was the way he pushed himself.
Exactly. But that leering, that leer.
Yeah, I know.
Let's just get one more story in.
Prince Andrew should be King Lear.
Stephen, Britain rejecting Emmanuel Macron's insane suggestion that NATO troops should go into
Well, I have to
Ukraine.
say, I always get worried when a short Frenchman starts getting delusions of military grandeur. You never know.
He thinks he's Napoleon. He's compared himself to Napoleon.
But amazing. Stefan Signori, the foreign minister, said, we may have troops in Ukraine, but they're not going to cross the, wait for it, the belligerence threshold.
What's
I'm sorry. Well, precisely. But I remember, I mean, none of you will remember this, but in the Vietnam War, we had Australian troops over there, and they were down initially as, like the American troops, as advisors. They weren't there. But in reality, they weren't. What they're talking about there is having French troops on the ground in Ukraine. That is potentially lethal.
World War III.
De-escalating, Mike, doesn't it?
No, Macron realised what he'd said and immediately rode back on it and said, I'm talking about having them there for training purposes, you know, to train Ukraine. Now, if he wants to do that, why doesn't he do it the way we do it? We've trained nearly 30,000 Ukrainian troops
on Salisbury Plain.
Exactly, on Salisbury Plain, in tanks, with anti-tank missiles and all that. And we've done more than any other country in the world to do that. But he wants to be Billy Big Boots again, right?
Yeah.
And the French have a very strange relationship with the military, with NATO, and with their view of the world, because they're so arrogant. Charles de Gaulle, I mean, laid the blueprint, didn't he? That France will never be subservient to the United States of America, despite the fact that the United States of America had to liberate them in the Second World War. And they've never forgiven them.
There's that amazing occasion when General de Gaulle said to Eisenhower, we want to get your troops out of Europe.
Yes.
And Eisenhower said, does that include all the dead ones?
Yes.
But, like, I mean, Stefan Sejourné, the foreign minister, who's actually made this statement, who's talking about, he seems to be the outlier here for Macron. And at the moment, there's only one country in the world, in Europe, that's actually supported this, and that's Lithuania. So France can breathe easy.
Right, we've run out of time, gentlemen.
Oh, not again.
Let me just ask you, did you hear about the fight at the Chippy the other day?
No, tell me.
Did somebody get battered?
A fish got battered and a bunch of chicks were assaulted. I didn't write it.
Lucky it was.
Oh, dear me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're going to be previewing the...
I would stick with the day job if I were you.
If it had been back of my church, would it have been the chipmunk or the fish fryer?
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. This is Prince G. Newsroom on GBNews.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
We have let Islamist extremism into Britain, we've let it fester, and now we've let it win. Our absolutely spineless surrender merchant political top brass are rolling over while government ministers wear stab vests and quit their jobs in fear. Veteran Tory Minister Mike Freer has had death threats from Islamists as well as an alleged arson attack on his office. The motive there has still not been established. He's standing down because he doesn't want to die. I cannot emphasise how important this is. A minister of the government is quitting his job because he doesn't want to be killed by a lunatic jihadi. And our Prime Minister has said absolutely nothing. Nothing. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak said he was saddened. Is that it? Our Prime Minister should have been out on the steps of Downing Street saying that we will not be intimidated. We will not let this continue. Enough is enough. What does he do instead? He tweets about XL bullies. Yeah, fantastic. Where's Keir Starmer on this? Well, he's conducting focus groups on how to get the Muslim vote back, so he's hardly going to come out all guns blazing, is he? Ed Davey? Well, there's no way a Liberal Democrat leader would come out and admit that his ideology has helped turn Britain into a poster nation for multicultural failure. The police have let protesters, which include rabid anti-Semites, rampage around London every flipping Saturday for the last 3 months. And today, they are finally saying that they don't support some of the protests, which in the past have included a now banned terror group and people holding up anti-Jewish signs. They're saying, please don't march down Whitehall. All right, but will you do anything to stop them if they ignore you? I doubt it. I honestly cannot believe that we have sunk to the level where a serving minister stands down because of threats from extremists and our Prime Minister just doesn't feel the need to address it.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And still to come, the scandal about how many small and medium businesses are being debanked. It wasn't just Nigel Farage, you know. But first, your news with Sophia.
Thanks, Andrew. It's 11:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Duke of Sussex has lost his High Court challenge against the government over his personal security. Prince Harry launched legal action in February 2020 after he was told he would no longer be given the same degree of taxpayer-funded protection when he's in the UK. His lawyers told the court he was treated less favourably and his children wouldn't feel at home if they couldn't be kept safe. The government had argued Prince Harry's protection should be dismissed because it's considered on a case-by-case basis. Thousands of farmers will gather for a demonstration outside the Welsh Parliament to protest against changes they say are threatening the industry. New rules have been proposed for subsidies, which includes a requirement for 10% of agricultural land to be used for trees. The Labour government insists the change is necessary to fight climate change, but could be adjusted by the end of the consultation. MPs facing threats to their safety will get extra security as part of a new £31 million government package. It follows growing concerns over MPs being targeted by protesters in recent months since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office said the package would be used to increase private sector security provisions, with all elected representatives to have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with on security matters. And any savings from the cut to national insurance will be wiped out by Tory council tax rises. That's according to the Labour Party. It comes after the Chancellor promised the largest ever tax cut for workers, with a 2% cut to national insurance. But with 95% of councils expected to put up council tax to the maximum of 4.99% from April, it's set to cancel out any savings. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2650 and €1.1696. The price of gold is £1,603.32 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,627 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
11:34 with Britain's Newsroom with GBNews, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So where is the best chippy in Britain? All will be revealed at the National Fish and Chip Awards this afternoon, and we're going to be joined by two of the finalists in just a moment.
But first, MPs have raised concerns over the treatment of small businesses by major banks after new figures showed more than 140,000 accounts were shut down by lenders over the past year. That's shocking.
Liam Halligan is here to explain why. What had these awful businesses done, Liam, to deserve such a punishment?
Well, firstly, no banks have broken the law here, but I would say there's been not quite a dereliction of duty, but there's been a slipping of standards in terms of service. Now, we all remember, don't we, when NatWest tried to debank our colleague Nigel Farage and strip him of his Coutts account, and that didn't turn out well because clearly they did do it for political reasons. That banged to rights, and Nigel rightly got an apology from the NatWest chief executive, and she subsequently had to stand down. This is slightly different. This is the Treasury Select Committee. As you know, I think a lot of the best work in the Commons goes on in the committees, these cross-party groups of MPs, and
100%.
House of Lords have the same. MPs committed to investigating things they're interested in on a cross-party basis. One of the most powerful select committees at Westminster is the Treasury Select Committee, and they've been investigating whether or not banks are not just debanking people, but are debanking businesses, right, small businesses. Now, as I often say here on GB News, on the money generally, we are good at small businesses in this country. Businesses of less than 100, 150 people, they employ 2/3 of us. They generate half of our national income, of our GDP. They're really, really important. A lot of banks are starting to think these small businesses, they don't make them any money. Why should we bother? And just in the last year, 150,000 small business accounts have been closed down. How do they... 3%. Imagine you're running a small business.
Can't imagine.
You've got payroll to make. You've got suppliers that you have to keep paying, otherwise you lose your credit rating with them. You're trying to bring money in. The taxman wants their cash every quarter for VAT.
How do you function? It's almost a human right, isn't it, to have a bank account?
What it is, Andrew, there's something called the Universal Service Obligation.
Right.
What does that mean? It means, say, for instance, if you're the post office, you have a Universal Service Obligation, you have to deliver to Orkney just as you have to deliver to central London, right? That's a Universal Service Obligation. If you have a banking licence in this country, which is literally a licence to create money, that's what it literally is, then it comes with a universal service obligation. Unless there are reasonable grounds, fraud, no fixed abode, whatever it is, you have to give people a bank account or a company bank account if their bona fides stack up. But you've got a lot of banks now, they're withdrawing from communities. We know there are banking deserts, and also they're withdrawing from companies.
And why, Liam?
Because they think it's expensive to maintain these accounts for small companies that have, low balances, people running businesses, as so many of us do, hand-to-mouth, cash flow's difficult. At the same time, the Treasury Select Committee's brought out this report. They're hearing this afternoon from Bim Afellamy, who's a talented Tory business minister, the MP for St Albans, Peter Lilly's old seat, very much seen as a Tory rising star. And they are going to question him big time, the Treasury Select Committee, about something that many of their constituents would have said to them. Why is it that I'm a small business or I work for a small business, we want to grow, we're good at what we do, we've got an order book, but we can't raise cash? So many of our small businesses can't raise the cash, the finance, to go on to the next stage, to become medium-sized, to become big businesses.
They're with the backbone, aren't they, of the economy?
And the banks in this country are not very good, certainly compared to the German banks, the French banks, even the American banks, at financing small businesses. They won't do the work, the legwork, the local legwork of investigating small businesses. You're a good prospect. we're your local bank, we're going to back you. It's not happening.
And this is where ESG, your environmental social governance, is being weaponised and killing small businesses. And what I mean by that is there are certain boxes you have to tick, particularly to get funding and to get loans. And if you're a decorator in Reading, it's much harder to show that you're trying to save the planet than if you're a corporation that creates paint and has a turnover of millions of pounds. And it's being used to push down the working person who employs people in their area, who spends money in their shops. It makes me sick, Liam.
I think there's a lot in that, Bev. I think ESG, environmental, social, governance issues are now being used not necessarily for good purposes. You know, some of them are well-intentioned. Some of the people in companies pushing this stuff, you know, have the right idea, and I salute what they're doing. But sometimes it's weaponised, I think that's a fair word, in order to do what executives feel is commercially the thing that they want to do, even if it goes against their universal service obligations. Look, why isn't Britain growing, right? We've got all this entrepreneurial genius in our country. I mean, I say this as a recent immigrant. My family came over from Ireland, a lot like yours, Andrew, back in the day. This country has attracted entrepreneurs from around the world for generations. We have our own thoroughbred, homegrown entrepreneurs too. We're really good at this small business stuff. So many of our small businesses, they get bought up by foreign companies, they milk them, they make the real money out of them, rather than keeping them here in the UK, keeping them British, paying tax here, because they can't raise the finance. Because British finance, and particularly British banks, they won't do the legwork. They don't want to do the legwork to give entrepreneurial loans in the main. Some of them do. Look, what's happening on the unlisted securities market, AIM in the City of London, absolutely path-breaking. There are always exceptions to what I'm saying. But if you are that decorator in Reading who's got vans full of guys, you're doing great work, you've got an order book, and you want to invest in new vans, new people...
Got to be ULEZ compliant.
All that stuff. You can't get the money to do it from a bank often.
Can anything be done to shame these banks into stop doing this?
Well, I think that's what the Treasury Select Committee are doing. I've been talking to various members of the Treasury Select Committee. You know, that's my job, about what they should be investigating. This investigation into debanking has been some time in the making. I must say, I think what we did, you and I, Bev, with Don't Kill Cash, Patrick, what Nigel did with debanking, GBNews has really planted a flag when it comes to the banking sector, has to look after individual people and the small and medium-sized businessman and businesswoman. This is a major cultural issue. It's a cultural issue. It's a blockage in our financial system. It holds back entrepreneurs, I agree with you, and basically small businesses are the source of so much growth.
And what reason are being given to these businesses when they have their bank accounts taken away? Because you said it might be they're not profitable. I know one guy who was running a gym up north, and he kept his gym open during the lockdowns because he thought, actually, we need people healthy, not sat at home getting fat and dying of COVID. And he kept them open, and therefore he lost his banking because of that, and they've never given it him back. Is it reasons like that?
Well, it will be many reasons. Again, I should say, I'm not accusing any bank of breaking any laws. They're not doing things that are illegal, but I do think they are using sometimes quite spurious reasons. You know, there will be some businesses, look, this business is full of fraud, there are massive tax investigations, you know, we're not sure of the bona fides of the directors
some of them will need closing down.
You shut down the bank account, that is a legitimate thing to do from a governance point of view. But there are people, and MPs have heard from them, I've heard from them, who feel that their bank accounts are being closed down just because they're not buying other products from the bank. They are literally using the bank as a utility rather than as a kind of, you know, ongoing suite of services.
And there's no profit in that.
And the bank wants to sell stuff on the side. These small business owners, they're often very, very shrewd. They don't go into overdraft because obviously that's a big deal for them. They manage their businesses, you know, by the skin of the teeth every day, living on their wits. And so the banks can't charge them what they want to charge them. But that's not a reason to close down these businesses, because these businesses are the lifeblood of our economy.
Talking of small businesses, thanks so much, Liam. Liam Halligan. Talking of small businesses, we're going to be talking in just a minute to two chippies. There's one day of the week that fish are really scared of. What's that, Andrew Pearce?
Friday.
Oh, my God, that was so bad. You would have written Newsroom.
Did you say, oh, my God?
She did.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, this will get you hungry for lunch. The country's top fish and chip shops are gathering in London today to decide the best in the business at the National Fish and Chip Awards.
So the industry's worth, can you believe this, £2 billion to the economy, but the challenges chippies are facing aren't just rival shops. Cost of living and other pressure are also obstacles between them and success.
That's right. So we sent our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, to the seaside for a portion and to meet one of the finalists.
A national favourite. It's hard to go wrong with fish and chips when Brits get hungry.
We've got 2 cod and chips with some scraps, salt and vinegar, slice of lemon.
But being the best in the business means taking on more than 10,000 other chippies at the National Fish and Chip Awards. At Chapel St Leonard's on the Lincolnshire coastline, the team at Marina Fish and Chips are finalists for the top prize, Takeaway of the Year. Danielle and Matthew started serving at the seaside in 2018.
In the summer, the holiday makers, they're coming for a quality fish and chip shop with the scenery of the beach as well. But also our locals, they also want a good quality fish and chips all year round.
The couple says fresh food is what keeps the customers coming back.
Everything's freshly cooked to order, so each customer's getting a consistent product every time. Nobody wants an oily, soggy fish, definitely not.
Brits eat a whopping 167 million portions a year, more than a few of those at the seaside.
It's just part of our culture, isn't it? I think you come to the seaside, you just expect to be able to have fish and chips somewhere.
The fish and chips here are fantastic, but they've got plenty of competition they have to beat if they're going to win big in the Fish and Chip Shop Awards.
There are 9 other shops from across the country contending for the best takeaway, but also awards for sustainability, staff, and even the best overseas chippy. The awards is a celebration despite tough times. The industry has been battered by the cost of living and international turmoil.
There you go, Andrew. 1 cod chips, mushy peas and homemade tartar sauce. Enjoy.
Fantastic. Looking forward to these.
Andrew is president of the National Federation of Fish Fryers.
Fish and chips are still popular. We're still getting people through the door, but it's the profit margin that's affected. It's leaving shop owners with very little at the end of the month.
He hopes the Chancellor can think of fish and chips in the upcoming budget.
All of hospitality is calling for reform of VAT, and with the budget coming up, we hope that they've got their ears open and they're willing to be brave and act on it.
Only one chippy can be crowned king of the business. However, the customer's favourite is usually the one just around the corner from home. Will Hollis, GB News, Chapel, St Leonards.
Oh, I am so desperate for some fish and chips now.
Just so people know, Bev may think it's odd that I like a pickled egg or a pickled onion or both with my fish and chips. Bev likes fish and chips with mushy peas, gravy and curry sauce. Disgusting.
Any Mancunians out there, in fact, anybody from the north of England will know that fish and chips without gravy is just not worth doing.
Tomato
Sacrilege.
ketchup has to be behind.
And a bit of that as well.
As well? How do you taste a fish and chips?
But aren't you the person who broke the hilarious story about Peter Mandelson one day asking for some...
Peter Mandelson was a candidate in Hartlepool, this rather metropolitan figure that he was. He went into a fish and chip shop in Hartlepool doing his bit, campaigning, and he orders his fish and chips. He's with all his canvassers, and he points to the man behind him and says, and I'll have a nice jar of that very nice guacamole. And there's a long pause, to which the chip shop owner says, you mean me mushy peas? He's never forgiven me for writing that, Peter Mandelson. And I write it all the time. Now he sees the funny side of it, but he didn't at the time.
Absolutely. I think it's hilarious. Well, listen, people, you've all been getting in touch at home to talk about Prince Harry losing his judicial review into whether he should have security. Steve says, does this set a precedent now that means Andrew will have to pay for his own protection? Yours does already?
He does, yep.
Oh, that's and a lot more. Don't go anywhere. We've not quite finished with you yet.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the latest forecast for GB News. Cloud increasing from the west today with rain moving east, but it will be milder for most of us by the afternoon. It has been a chilly but bright start in the east. However, we've got these weather fronts moving in now. A warm front bringing areas of cloud and some outbreaks of rain. That rain will be persistent in the west. It'll be heavy at times, particularly over parts of Wales and later on northwest England. But it does stay dry throughout much of the afternoon in the far east, especially East Anglia and the southeast, where we cling on to some brighter skies, but elsewhere it's largely cloudy, the breeze picking up. That breeze is bringing milder conditions, so generally temperatures at 9 to 12 Celsius. It's not going to feel as fresh as more recent days. Then into the evening, the bands of rain move east. There'll be some heavy bursts at times, again, mostly over western hills. And as the night goes on, the main focus for the rain pushes south and eastwards, with showers replacing the wet weather across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Colder air moving in here, with some of these showers falling as snow over the Scottish mountains by dawn. And the wind really picks up in the northwest, with gales across the north and northwest of Scotland, 60-mile-per-hour gusts. And it's going to feel colder, but there will be some brighter spells in between the showers. Meanwhile, further southeast, a mild start to the day, but a damp start, and that rain hangs on into the afternoon. 12 Celsius for London, 6 Celsius there in the north of Scotland.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's Wednesday, so it must be Prime Minister's questions. Let's go straight now to Gloria De Piero and Christopher Hope, 4 PMQs in our Westminster studio.
Yes, Andrew, and hi, Bev. Yes, it's that time of the week for you to be sending in your questions. What would our listeners and viewers be asking the Prime Minister, or indeed the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer?
We love getting our viewers and listeners questions. Remember to tell us who you are, give us your name and where you're from. We're going to put it to our brilliant panel of politicians. gbviews@gbnews.com. PMQs Live is all about you. Bev and Andrew, briefly, what would you be asking the Prime Minister today?
Very simple question from me to the Prime Minister. Do you want to keep Lee Anderson as a member of the Conservative Party?
Good question.
And I might ask him on the day of the Fish and Chip Awards, how does the Prime Minister like his fish and chips? It tells you a lot about a person.
With guacamole or mushy peas, I imagine.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Bev, and thank you, Andrew. And it's fast approaching midday. But first of all, the questions for our Bob.
This is GB News, Britain's election channel. PMQs Live starts right now.
It's midday on Wednesday, the 28th of February. This is PMQs Live on GB News with Gloria De Piero and me, Christopher Hope.
In just 2.5 minutes' time, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer will go head-to-head at Prime Minister's questions. We'll have full coverage of every moment and we'll be getting full reaction from Cabinet Office Minister Alex Burkhart and the Labour MP Stella Creasy. But before that, let's say hello to you both. Thank you both for being here. Stella, we're hearing a lot about MP security at the moment in the news. Now, I read an article that you wrote last week in The Guardian saying that public lives